Welcome, Kevin Wilde, you fatuous git. Today, we are gathered to celebrate Coachability, the Leadership Superpower, a book that sets a new bar for empty jargon, meaningless metrics, and stunning self-importance. In your honor, we'll dissect this volume of vapid advice, page by excruciating page, as we try to understand why you think coachability is the magic missing ingredient for modern leadership, and why, with all the bluster of a poorly written TED Talk, you neglected to actually define it. You talk about top leaders in organizations as if you've identified the chosen few, but in reality, your leaders sound more like pawns, meekly obedient, eagerly absorbing feedback without so much as a raised eyebrow. In Kevin's world, coachability appears to be synonymous with being a mindless yes-man, unquestioning, unoriginal, and all too willing to accept feedback no matter how irrelevant or misguided. Kevin Wilde's understanding of leadership is so catastrophically flawed that his choices for what defines a leader read like the setup for a dystopian satire. Kevin reduces leaders to coachable feedback sponges whose worth is measured not by their decisions, foresight, or impact, but by how willing they are to nod along to advice from others, regardless of its merit. The kind of leader Kevin envisions isn't just lame, but downright dangerous, a virulent pathology of narcissism, more preoccupied with their coachability scores than with actual effectiveness. Worse yet, he's teaching these goblins how to disguise themselves to look like people who are genuinely competent. But it doesn't end there. Kevin, you managed to bungle every attempt at credibility with some of the most laughably flimsy evidence seen in a management book. Your analysis, a cocktail of anecdotes and data so shallow that it's practically self-parody. And as if to compensate, you've sprinkled the book with your own self-assured musings that are about as profound as a pinky swear at a schoolgirl's sleepover party, only you're dead serious. So buckle up, Kevin. We're about to give you some leadership insight for your preposterous corporate fan fiction. Prepare for a thorough roasting, and if you skulk and storm out, we'll assume it's just because you're not coachable. The low-hanging fruit rots first. Evidence-based. Reviewers of Kevin Wilde's book dutifully play along with the fantasy that Kevin used evidence and reason to develop this garbage, but some of these things are so blatantly ridiculous they make you wonder if this book was written as a dare. Let's dive into the shallow end of Kevin Wilde's logic pool, where the water is ankle-deep and the lifeguard is always off-duty because you'd have to be a moron to need help here. Data-driven. Right off a cliff. The book reviewers calling this work evidence-based and data-driven were obviously paid off because there's no data in sight. How is derailing defined? Who decides? What measures define overall leadership effectiveness? Kevin provides zero transparency for his methods, and the references he lists at the back of the book are just as useless. Just how do ratios work? Kevin's bold claim, the ratio of giving feedback to receiving it is 10 to 1. There are 9 for everyone. Wait. What? 9 for everyone is a ratio of 9 to 1. If Kevin thinks this is how numbers work, I shudder to think what other mistakes were made in his hidden just trust me methods. Someone grab this man a calculator. Okay, let's try counting to 5. Kevin proudly cites the Army's debriefing questions, which he counts as 4. 1. What was the objective? 2. What happened? 3. What didn't happen? 4. What did we learn? 4. 2. The sequel. What can we do better? Oh, whatever. So, there's one mistake. It couldn't possibly happen twice. Kevin lists 4 steps to taking a leader note, which include, let's count together, pause to be taken seriously, shift, ask, paraphrase, thanks, and next, 5. 5 is 4. Kevin, I know you're trying to redefine leadership, but can we not redefine numbers? Or is this more of a 1984, there are 4 lights kind of thing? Allow me to plan your obsolescence. Kevin insists that leadership is like regularly checking for updates to keep your computer running smoothly. Because, yes, Kevin, there's never been a catastrophic problem from a zero-day exploit in an update. Kevin doesn't understand computers, so blind trust it is. Kevin doesn't understand leadership, so blind trust it is. Kevin's next book on leadership, have you tried turning it off and on again? How many times do you wash your hands? Kevin quotes someone calling habits the compound interest of self-improvement, apparently forgetting that compounding is exponential growth. Translation, if this metaphor were true, we'd all end up as obsessive maniacs, compulsively tying and untying our shoes. At some point, having a large quantity of habits leads to a clinical diagnosis. Denial of the antecedent. I'm not going to fall for the denial of the antecedent you teed up, but I assure you many in your audience will. Kevin states that receiving feedback without reflecting on it won't guarantee positive results, but does reflecting on the feedback guarantee positive results? Do you want us to assume that is the case, or was this statement completely unnecessary? Seriously, stop listening. I can't believe I have to point this out, but Chapter 5 includes the title, Stop Listening. Seriously. In a book about coachability, an entire philosophy rooted in listening, Kevin inexplicably tells us to stop it. Either Kevin is trolling us, or he's just bad at titles. Actually, why not both? There are no stupid questions. Just. Kevin proves the world calls out for his cherished insights because Google search requests for giving feedback outnumber requests for receiving feedback by some ratio. This is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Obvious reason is obvious, Kevin. There's even fewer search requests on how to pick a booger, but children around the world seem to be able to handle that one without a library of books on the subject. To further prove how much we plebeians need his wisdom, Kevin searches for books on receiving feedback. According to Kevin, the top book is ranked #23-254 in the book rankings. Wow, no one is buying books on how to receive information. In the very next chapter, Kevin rides the coattails of a book he names, and would you like to guess where that book ranks? Number 524. How did you miss that one, Kevin? You referenced it directly. One of the dopes Kevin got to write an endorsement for this Coachability book said that their bookshelves grown because of all the weight from all the books about coaching, but there is only one book in existence about learning how to accept information from other people, and that is Kevin Wilde's book on coachability. That sounds more like a you problem, Nigel. What kind of person collects so many books about forcing their opinions on others? We'll get to that later. Kevin is either lying to you to make himself sound profound and keep you dependent on him and his cohort, or he is truly not self-aware and should never have been in a position to influence leadership. There has been a book available since 900 AD, famous around the world, about receiving feedback and personal improvement. Meditations, by Marcus Aurelius. And in the book rankings, it's number 188. Results. These aren't just mistakes, they're the literary equivalent of leaving your fly down during your corporate keynote speaker gig. I would seriously be embarrassed if my name were on the very first page of this book, praising it as brilliant. Select your conclusion and manufacture the data. Kevin Wilde's approach to leadership is the logical equivalent of duct taping a parachute to a Buick Century and calling it flight ready. In this segment, we'll explore two of his favorite tools, selection bias to make it look like the results always match his claims and scapegoating to avoid accountability when they don't. His arguments are more confession than anything else. I never could understand real leadership, but look at my confidence. You didn't believe hard enough. Let's start with Kevin's holistic roadmap, which is about as holistic as a ketchup packet being counted as a vegetable to round out the school lunch requirements. His 7-part system conveniently includes personality and environment for Kevin to promptly wave away, declaring they're beyond your control. Translation. These 2 parts exist purely as escape hatches for when his methods fall flat, which, judging by the rest of the book, is often. When his model doesn't work, it's not because the model is bad, no, it's your personality or some nebulous environmental factor that you just can't fix. The only thing missing here is Kevin instructing the reader to yell out, "I do believe in fairies." Cooking the books well done. But don't worry, if personality and environment don't catch the blame, Kevin's selection bias will ensure his methods look foolproof, no matter how many fools actually prove otherwise. For instance, he proves that coachability improves performance by only studying leaders already enrolled in leadership development programs. That's like proving that bubblegum helps people stop drug use by exclusively surveying people in rehab. Of course, they improve, they're already enrolled to spend company time on that. Meanwhile, anyone outside this bubble of hand-picked achievers might as well be invisible. Kevin doesn't see them, so he doesn't count them. How convenient. Speaking of not counting, Kevin's infamous mapping it out exercise takes bias to new heights. He tells readers to gather feedback only from specific people they expect will give them feedback on specific topics. It's the self-help equivalent of pre-screening your Yelp reviews to ensure a 5-star rating. Why aim for actual improvement when you can just curate the illusion of it? It's not leadership, it's reality TV for your ego. A sucker born every minute. And let's not forget Kevin's Mingle Guru experiment. In one of the most cringe-inducing moments of the book, Kevin recruits a guru who encourages executive leaders to wander around their organizations, begging for feedback on their flaws like they're trick-or-treating for criticism. Kevin proudly declares this was a hit, but then immediately admits that the executives involved never wanted to do it again. Why? Because being forced to act out a bad improv skit while pretending it's leadership development is only fun for the person who wrote the script. Everyone else is just suffering politely. Kevin didn't seem to notice why the executives didn't tell him why they'd never do that again. The executives were responsible for hiring Kevin, placating him, playing along, and justifying his continued employment. Just take the L, Kevin. Are you playing dumb because you know how useless you are, or are you really this stupid? Ultimately, Kevin's need to protect his fragile sense of self reveals that his model is as scholarly as a gender studies paper on the lack of consent between predator and prey. If this is any indicator of the reasoning skills Kevin based all his work on, we're in trouble. Forget saving the ship, he's throwing the women and children overboard to make room for the lifeboats. 1 versus 100 in a room full of jerks. Oh, Kevin Wilde, you oracle of coachability, somehow you turned what was already a corporate hostage situation into an exercise in creating a toxic workplace. Let's talk about this so-called game of his, the one where he gathers the leadership, forces one poor sap to look like an idiot, and then uses the collective incompetence of the room to prove, what exactly? That nobody in this room is fit to lead a game of solitaire? Let's break it down. Kevin goes to speak at a company as an expert executive leadership coach and fills an auditorium with the top 100 people in leadership positions. He asks for a volunteer to leave the auditorium and leave their phone behind. Kevin hides the phone. Congratulations, Kevin, you've mastered the intellectual rigor of a magician performing for drunk wedding guests. He gives everyone else instructions to ignore the volunteer for the first 30 seconds, give vacuous platitudes like, "You're doing great. I know you can do it," for the next 30 seconds, then devolve into the childhood game of warmer/colder for the last 30 seconds. Everyone always does as they are told, and the volunteer never finds their phone before the kindergarten play starts. Of course, Kevin, because you've just cultivated a low-trust environment where nobody's allowed to actually lead. Imagine being that volunteer. The people in this room represent the top 100 leadership positions in your company, yet they all seem satisfied to ignore you and watch you fumble about on a simple task, only then to mock you like elementary school bullies. Find your phone, loser. This game doesn't reveal anything profound about being coachable. It's just a glorified party trick designed to make Kevin feel like the smartest guy in a room full of dim bulbs. If these are the top 100 leaders, then it's only because people like Kevin helped to put them there. How many leaders are actually in the room? Probably 0. Heck, even the volunteer failed to demonstrate true leadership. I know someone who used to manage leadership training for executives in a large corporation, and when I told him this story, he said, "Well, I've been to things like this, and you just do what you're asked to do." That's leadership? As taught by a person responsible for teaching leadership? What would you do? Now I want you to think back to an example of real leadership. One famous example I could use comes from the popular TV series Star Trek. Not the weak sauce on streaming these days, the original Captain James Tiberius Kirk. How different would this scenario be if the only person to beat the Kobayashi Maru had been in the auditorium? As Kevin is hiding the phone and instructing the leaders of Starfleet to act like the jackwagons he needs for his stupid demonstration, Kirk sees the injustice of what is about to be done to the volunteer, Commander Kinro. Spock intuitively leans over to the captain and gives him the answer to the question he was about to ask. Starfleet command regulations expect decisive action in 4 seconds. There are 2 ranks of command above that of captain present, and, I suspect, will not take action in that time. Once the volunteer re-enters the auditorium, Captain Kirk patiently waits a full 8 seconds before standing up to take action. Let's take a moment to consider what's happening here. One of our own, a leader in Starfleet, has volunteered only to be left to flounder while the so-called leaders in this room sit in silent complicity. Kevin Wilde makes a game of the responsibility of leadership, but this isn't a game. It's injustice. I call it an indictment. An indictment on those here who failed to take action in the time afforded to their rank. As the captain speaks, there is some movement among the others in the auditorium. Leadership is more than wearing a title or sitting in the right chair. Leadership means action. It means stepping in when the right thing to do isn't accounted for in the regulations, not hiding behind them. It means having the courage to go against instruction when instruction is against principle. Deference to this gamesman demeans the fundamental principles Starfleet was built upon. Whispers have moved among the scores of captains, who are now secretly passing something toward Captain Kirk. Any in this room who failed to act according to your rank, or who would have allowed this affront to Commander Kinrow as scripted, even you Kevin Wilde, have failed as leaders. If there is any honor in you, you would consider yourselves unfit to hold your rank. Leadership must be deserved at every opportunity. And this one is mine. One of the other captains covertly hands something to Kirk, whose hands are behind his back, just as Kirk makes his way to the volunteer. Now, let me pose a solution to this poisonous exercise that is befitting a leader. A leader creates solutions where none exist. The volunteer is expected to find their phone. What makes a phone theirs but ownership? If I were to give the volunteer my phone, it would become his. Therefore, the volunteer has found their phone. Kirk hands Commander Kinrow a phone, and he looks to find it is his original phone taken and hidden by Kevin. Just what is a coachable leader? Incapable of even the basics, coachability is never defined. Not once. Throughout the entire book, Kevin dances around the term like a middle schooler trying to bluff their way through a book report they clearly didn't read. Kevin Wilde's failure to define coachability is the kind of intellectual negligence you'd expect from someone learning to spell their name with fridge magnets. Kevin offers nothing but circular nonsense. Coachable leader is a leader who is coachable, and you're left to infer that coachability roughly translates to doing whatever your boss wants, no matter how stupid or self-serving it is. If that's the meaning of coachability, then coachable leader is an oxymoron. Kevin doesn't bother to substantiate his claims, like his assertion that low coachability increases blind spots. No evidence, no metrics, just cosmic vibrations, man. Leadership effectiveness? Same deal. Just what is derailing? How is that measured? Who decides? Apparently, leaders don't need measures for measurable outcomes. Just trust me, I'm the one telling the executives who is and isn't promotable. You just need to seem open to my feedback. Promises of future potential are the only currency Kevin can muster. He laments the low coachability of leaders who prioritize being correct over humoring someone else's bad ideas. Heaven forbid a competent leader explain their rationale with additional information when feedback misses critical variables. According to Kevin, that's defensiveness. Apparently, asking questions or providing context is the gateway drug to managerial anarchy. Kevin seems hell-bent on turning the concept of coachability into a Kafkaesque nightmare where a reasonable response disqualifies you from being labeled coachable. Speaking of warped priorities, Kevin's anecdotes would be laughable if they weren't so embarrassing. Take Corey, for example. Corey couldn't manage basic adulting, and her path to success involved selfishly dumping her work on employees to climb the corporate ladder. She lost a very valuable employee, who surely had a family, but hey, Corey got her groove back. The real kicker? Kevin frames her self-promotion as the praiseworthy virtue of coming to him for feedback. Flattery will only get you anything you want, keep it up. Meanwhile, Len's staff accused him of micromanaging because he moved his arms too much while talking. It is never explained how one thing ties to the other. Len feels like his staff doesn't understand what he's trying to get across. Instead of addressing the obvious communication issue, Kevin's radiant advice was to teach Len to stop making use of his arms. Problem solved, right? Or maybe it just made the real problem invisible. Marvelous. Fix the symptom, ignore the cause, and hope nobody notices. And let's not forget Kevin's own embarrassing self-portrayal, as he describes himself as a petulant, immature prick who should never have been trusted in a leadership role. In the old days, that would be the moment he would have been barred from ever being in any position of leadership, but his boss, Jim, instead advised Kevin to just act differently, as if slapping a new coat of paint on a broken-down car would somehow make it roadworthy. Not capable of being a leader? Just act like one instead. So help me, instead of seeing the horrible advice for what it is, Kevin is mindlessly coachable and embraces the idea of actors as leaders. Kevin's attempt to equate leaders with actors is the cherry on this absurd sundae. Actors get notes from directors, so Kevin expects leaders need to get notes too. But here's the thing, actors are not leaders. They are literally hired to do as they're told. A leader, on the other hand, is supposed to take initiative, not just incorporate every piece of feedback like a spineless moron. Kevin's coachability is essentially just high-octane, high-fructose, factory-grade, maximum-strength, glitter-wrapped, fragrance-infused, industrialized, weaponized, gutless, thoughtless, tight-fisted corporate obedience training. Hallelujah! Where's the Tylenol? EQ and coachability, the obedience metrics of the intellectually fragile. Emotional intelligence, EQ, and coachability are the twin pillars of modern managerial pseudo-wisdom, but let's call them what they really are, turd polish for the fragile egos of the incompetent. Kevin supports this farce, unaware of how EQ and coachability are wielded to protect intellectually flaccid managers from the terrifying prospect of having to think. At the front lines, managers are expected to bend themselves into pretzels to meet the emotional demands of everyone around them, while simultaneously being penalized for not bowing fast enough to the whims of their superiors. EQ and coachability are cudgels to keep low-level management in line and hall passes for weak managers to dodge accountability. Let's start with EQ, the professional equivalent of asking, "How would you like to be pampered today, Your Majesty?" Trainers tell us EQ is about treating others how they want to be treated, turning every workplace interaction into a minefield of emotional guesswork. Forget about accountability or professionalism, this is about coddling every person's precious feelings in a game where the rules are made up and the points don't matter. It's as if these goobers expect you to maintain a dossier on every colleague's preferred treatment methods, lest you risk being labeled a low EQ pariah. Then there's coachability, the Orwellian doublespeak for, because I said so. Kevin seems too afraid to even define it in the book, probably because he knows it boils down to licking the boots of everyone with an opinion while pretending you enjoy the taste. Inferring from Kevin, being coachable means jumping to every fleeting whim of supervisors like trained seals performing for half-rotted fish. It's not about growth or adaptability, it's about how quickly you can say, "Thank you, sir, may I have another?" Wilde's numbers on layoffs are a cell phone of monumental proportions. 26% of dismissals are for low coachability, and 23% are for low EQ. So 49% of terminations boil down to a bad boss with hurt feelings throwing a toil temper tantrum. This isn't an indictment of personnel, it's a flashing neon sign screaming that the real problem is managerial fragility. If half of your firings are based on feels, the problem is the HR-sponsored psychological abuse from your crop of delicate managers who can't handle a stiff breeze of constructive feedback without folding like a cheap tent. And what about the executives? Oh, this is rich. EQ and coachability mysteriously evaporate as you climb the corporate ladder. Wilde's own chart matches the one commonly used for EQ, both showing executive leaders scoring lowest in both categories. Of course, they do, CEOs don't have to tolerate this nonsense. The good ones are getting work done while the bad ones just sit at the top, tossing EQ and coachability grenades down the ladder. Kevin's message is clear, if you want to rise through the ranks, drop these traits like a hot potato and master the art of weaponizing them against your subordinates. Let's be extra clear, EQ and coachability are not about fostering communication or growth. They are survival mechanisms for mediocre managers who can't handle pushback or manage their own inadequacies. These are the people who can't process a counterpoint without crying into their kale smoothies and writing someone up for being uncooperative. Yet Kevin's book has the audacity to frame these traits as virtues, demanding employees bend over backwards to placate the overlords. If your boss starts spouting this nonsense, you might as well prepare yourself for this weaponized narcissism wrapped in a Hallmark card. It will contain a passive-aggressive threat, perception is reality. And those who don't align with our values often find themselves elsewhere. Translation, if I don't like what you said, you have low EQ and should be walked out the door. If you don't like something I said, you are uncoachable and will be thrown out the door. The profit machine behind the coachability cult. Before we Leroy Jenkins our way into the final takedown of Kevin Wilde's Coachability, the Leadership Superpower, let's take a moment to state the obvious. This book exists for one reason, narcissism. Not enlightenment, not better leadership, and certainly not personal growth. It's a poison pill, crafted to embolden corporate narcissists in masking their incompetence, while demanding everyone else bow to the fabricated superiority of Kevin and his band of conspirators. Who buys this stuff? If you have a copy of this book, it's not because you wanted it. Let's not kid ourselves, some egomaniac assigned it to you. Nobody, and I mean nobody, woke up one day thinking, golly gee, I sure wish I could improve my ability to listen to some butt-cracks opinions. Let's see if there's an instruction manual on that. This isn't a self-help book, it's a punishment from your boss, who probably ordered copies for the entire department to improve synergy. And Kevin's assertion on page 49, that there are people out there eager to become more coachable, but just don't know where to start, is just adorable in its ludicrousness. If someone didn't know where to start, how exactly did they stumble upon this book? Did they Google, how do I get my head all the way up in there? These devotees are just as fictional as the suspiciously convenient anecdotes Kevin spins throughout this book. Let's not pretend the real people in these stories would even recognize themselves in Kevin's nauseating, one-sided retellings. Oh, that's who buys this stuff. Kevin discloses that nonsense like this is a $300 billion a year industry. Companies are forking over billions for leadership training, emotional intelligence seminars, and yes, coachability workshops. And what do they have to show for it? CEOs still complaining, in Kevin's First Words section, page 19, about the lack of leadership talent in their organizations. If you're spending billions on leadership training and still can't find leaders, you are promoting the wrong people. It's that simple. The audacity of it all is staggering. For centuries, people have had free access to Stoicism, a philosophy that actually teaches emotional regulation, resilience, and wisdom. But instead of studying and teaching that at almost no cost, corporations spend billions on watered-down PowerPoints that amount to, feelings are truth. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. These days, it takes one to tango. Even Joseph Zenger, no stranger to corporate psychobabble, acknowledges that coaching is a two-way street. It requires both parties to engage in good faith. So why does Kevin's book put all the responsibility on the receiver? Where's the chapter on holding leaders accountable for giving constructive, actionable feedback? Spoiler, it doesn't exist, because that would expose the fact that people like Kevin can't distinguish between good and bad feedback. Lock and load. So here we are, poor workmanship revealed, logical fallacies exposed, con artist stage act spoiled, leadership vision dispelled, false tools melted down, and billions of dollars wasted. All from a book no one asked for, being shoved down your throat. But hey, Kevin's friends still think he's right about it all, making them right by extension. Let's see if they're all still grinning when we expose how this drivel isn't just pointless, it's aggressively radioactive. Hold on to your butts. The final boss fight starts now. Malignant narcissism. We've danced around narcissism in earlier chapters, poked at its edges, and laughed at the absurdities, but now it's time to call it what it is. Not just the garden variety self-obsession of someone who takes too many selfies, but full-blown malignant narcissism, ringleader of the dark tetrad. This is marked by entitlement, manipulation, lack of empathy, and outright sadism, all weaponized for personal gain. It's a psychological wrecking ball, tearing through our company's organizations and the lives of everyone in them. Malignant narcissists don't just want admiration, they demand submission. They don't see people as individuals with thoughts or feelings but as props in the theater of their own superiority. And when challenged, they retaliate, often brutally, with all the subtlety of the Kool-Aid man at a child's funeral. What makes Kevin's gang particularly dangerous isn't just their insatiable hunger for validation, it's their belief that their warped worldview is actually beneficial. These clueless chumps masquerade as wise mentors, humble leaders, and benevolent teachers while sowing chaos and misery. And now they've wrapped their pathology in corporate jargon, turning their dysfunction into a dangerous contagion. In this chapter, we'll dismantle the malignant narcissism that saturates Kevin's book. We'll explore how people like Kevin believe the world revolves around their version of it. We'll highlight the laughably sycophantic self-promotions that prop up their delusions. We'll expose the startling admissions of cognitive dissonance, proof that even they can't fully believe this nonsense. We'll show how Kevin views the rest of us as he infantilizes his readers. And finally, we'll drive the point home with a few of Kevin's own examples, which showcase just how impossible it is to avoid the destruction these narcissists leave in their wake. Grandiose sense of self-importance. Kevin and his kind have a peculiar worldview. Their brains must be the standard operating system of all humanity. Whatever they think, feel, or experience must be universal. If they stumble or fall, it's only because their body be trippin', right? But if they spot something worth praising, suddenly they're the unique exception, towering above the rest of us mere mortals. Their unchecked arrogance outright bulldozes any notion of the individuality of anyone else. Not particularly positive, on page 2, Joe Folkman declares that we all think what he thinks. On page 70, Kevin assures us that, just like him, nobody really wants to receive feedback. Great confession from a coachability coach. On page 105, Kevin's inability to be organized or focused translates to the proclamation that all leaders are busy and easily distracted. Seen as positive, on page 56, Kevin takes this incongruity up a notch, crediting himself for results he assumes Mac must have gotten from obediently doing what Kevin suggested. Did Mac actualize the assumed results? Who cares? Kevin is so self-satisfied with his advice that Mac's fate must be a wondrous extension of Kevin's brilliance. Somehow both. On page 71, Kevin decides the exceptionality of his talent while simultaneously attributing a potential flaw to everyone else on the planet, that even he, a famous coachability marvel, hears voices in his head, so obviously you laborers hear them too. Arrogance is in the top 5 warning signs of narcissism, and here we see it. A worldview so narrow and self-serving it would be laughable if it weren't so damaging. This inability to contemplate another person's perspective is what also fuels lack of empathy, but is itself fueled by an addiction to praise. Need for excessive admiration. Narcissists thrive on admiration, but the need for validation in this book is so overwhelming that it spills from the pages like an overturned tractor trailer full of participation trophies. It's not enough to peddle their flimsy ideas, they need to tell you just how wonderful they are. They need the whole world to genuflect before them, lavishing praise so excessive it should sicken you. Case in point, the book opens with the very first page being an ad for this very same book, by Zenger Folkman. His shameless lie is just a warm-up for the 8 pages of mutual backpatting. Zenger, naturally, proclaims that Kevin's book doesn't just address some leadership flaws, it unravels the cause of all leader failures. It's a bold claim, but why stop there? Why not add, this book makes wrinkles vanish, regrows hair, and cures cancer? Rich Mulholland levels up the silliness by asserting that coachable leaders are rarer than great coaches. If that's true, then why are there so many coaches? Are they forming support groups to mourn their uselessness? Meanwhile, Patty Phillips messed up by not reading the memo, declaring that leadership, not coachability, is the superpower. The technical error doesn't matter so long as Patty is adding to the chorus. But the clincher is Michael Stanier, who delivers a backhanded compliment so polished it belongs in the passive-aggressive museum of art. He praises Kevin for uncovering what I already knew, essentially stealing Kevin's thunder while pretending to applaud him. It's a real jerk move. Kevin doesn't even get to be the hero of his own book, but sharks eat their own, so Kevin had better publish it anyway. This pathological echo chamber doesn't just attract more narcissists, it breeds them, like mosquitoes in stagnant water. Their mutual admiration prompts mutual corporate spending on each other's works, a self-perpetuating hierarchy of self-congratulatory freeloaders. Meanwhile, those who don't fall in line with this cult of validation are swiftly dismissed, mocked, or scapegoated as uncoachable. Sense of entitlement. If Kevin and his merry band of avocado farts share one defining trait, it's their staggering sense of entitlement. Their absolute belief that they deserve to define how everyone else should think, behave, and succeed, even while admitting, sometimes in the same breath, that they are clueless about how reality works. The impudence is so obnoxious. Kevin published Michael Stanier's admission that offering help makes people resistant to it. Which people, Michael? All people? What he's really admitting to is a classic narcissist reaction, projecting his fragile ego onto the world and assuming everyone else must also recoil at assistance because it threatens their superiority complex. Not intellectually resilient people, Michael. They welcome help, take advantage of it, and move on. But Kevin's gang demands that others change to accommodate their insecurities while they hoard the right to resist change themselves. Then there's Kevin's startling moment of accidental self-awareness on page 39. He admits that employees fear seeking feedback when their supervisors might retaliate or label them as lacking confidence. This is a rare slip where Kevin almost stumbles into acknowledging that the problem isn't coachability but toxic coaching from punitive managers. Does he follow this to its logical conclusion? Of course not. Instead, he barrels past it, entitling himself on page 20 to claim that people with low confidence simply aren't coachable. Why? Because Kevin said so. There's no real explanation, but the implication is clear. If you're not as overconfident as Kevin, you must be defective. Finally, the glimmering gem from Rich Mulholland, complaining that it's unfair some leaders are naturally able to learn. The smoking gun that this book isn't for real leaders, it's for narcissists desperate to cosplay competence. Rich and Kevin can't stand that some people succeed without needing their full virtuous platitudes, so they double down, packaging their own entitlement as a manual for self-improvement. They can let slip the flaws in their thinking, sidestep all accountability, and still demand everyone kneel before their half-baked theories. If that isn't Class A unmerited entitlement, what is? Lack of empathy. Kevin Wilde's lack of empathy bounds off the page like a brat plowing their way through the elderly to be the first at the buffet. Not the straightforward, overt cruelty you might expect from a cartoon villain. Kevin's brand of detachment comes wrapped in a patronizing smugness that reduces his audience to wide-eyed children in need of his paternal wisdom. His contempt for the people he claims to serve is so unbearably pungent, but he's not really self-aware enough to see why he'd need to hide it. For starters, Kevin gleefully tells his reader that he knew what was going to happen next in the book he was writing. Let that sink in. He's so detached from his audience's intelligence that he assumes this meta-commentary on the writing process will blow their tiny minds. Wow, we're supposed to say, Kevin is so smart he knew what was about to happen next in his own story. What a genius! It's the literary equivalent of guessing how many of your own fingers you are holding up behind your back. Then there's the tired overused platitude, I learn more from my students than they do from me, which he treats like a pearl of wisdom despite its glaring incoherence. If true, it means Wilde has no justification to be presenting himself as an expert on the topic. Yet here he is, scribbling his nonsense into a book and expecting us to pay for it. Wilde isn't learning from his students, he's putting on the act he's seen get rewarded before. Most telling, Kevin instructs his readers to stay on Santa's nice list and don't be naughty. Trying to have some levity is one thing, but casting your readers as children. Kevin genuinely appears to believe his audience is so immature, so incapable of grasping adult responsibilities, that this is appropriate. He sees you not as a professional or a peer, but as a toddler. Finally, Wilde sums up his philosophy with the casual framing of leadership as a game. Not an honor, not a responsibility, but a game. In one stroke, he trivializes the impact leaders have on people's lives, treating the pain and struggles of others as nothing more than cannon fodder in Call of Duty. This isn't just narcissistic detachment, it's utter Machiavellian disdain. If Kevin can't see the humanity in his own audience, what do you think he sees in the people who aren't paying for his advice? Manipulative behavior. Rounding out the top 5 warning signs of narcissism is the malicious control people like Kevin wield and organizations that tolerate them. To them, the rest of us are children, but the way we are to be punished is anything but childish. If you've ever wondered how narcissists thrive in corporate environments, Kevin lays it out for you: rewrite reality, make it personal, and ensure everyone else is too busy pointing fingers to notice your game of smoke and mirrors. Take Serge, for instance. Ah, poor Serge. The tragic scapegoat of Kevin's managerial ineptitude. Serge gets caught in the net Kevin cast to require everyone produce a feedback report. Kevin is insulted that Serge wasn't visibly reflecting enough, so he interrogates Serge. It's obvious Kevin had read Serge's feedback and was trying to poke at something, because he asks Serge what valuable blind spot had he uncovered. Serge indicated that the report showed what he expected to see. Kevin seems to have felt so dismissed and insulted. Serge hadn't acknowledged the trivial speck that Kevin was so proud of himself for. I believe Kevin absolutely retaliated, and, in my opinion, admits it with his slip of foreshadowed trouble to come. I bet Serge didn't last another 6 months. Then there's Alex. Kevin claims observers found Alex argumentative and a poor listener, yet there he was taking the feedback to heart and having the nerve to try solving the problem. Kevin complains Alex didn't just change himself and move on, but instead Alex had a 3-tab spreadsheet, no doubt the default for Excel at the time, trying to figure out who put people up to say such an inaccurate thing about him. He's an engineer. Of course, he's going to find the cause of such an obvious fault. Kevin can't afford the risk of Alex discovering the truth, so he accuses Alex of trying too hard and not having enough energy left to take action to change himself. How do you know how much energy Alex has, Kevin? You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. There's always something to improve in an organization, but things could be going relatively smooth when people like Kevin come to pull some stupid stunt like a feedback report to create a job for themselves. They nitpick over any little thing and only they get to interpret the tea leaves for the executives duped into playing along. If the execs aren't careful, it will come for them too. The most disqualifying example comes on page 83, where Kevin encounters Raphael sitting in his chair, thinking. This behavior isn't the frantic dingbat flailing that signals a leader. On page 90, Kevin points out he thinks all leaders are in hyperactive mode. After all, the vast majority of people in leadership are the ones like him, put there by people like him. How can it be that someone with this strange behavior could be in a position so far above his? Kevin is so bewildered by Raphael's stillness that he's about to call for an ambulance when he is notified that this is what it looks like when a man thinks. Let's chew on that a minute. Kevin admits he's made it so far in life as to be an executive leadership coach of a major corporation, but he's never actually seen a man think before in his life. An engineer like Alex could tell you that this means Kevin himself has never before taken on the daring task of thinking. These creatures don't think. They mimic and manipulate. They wriggle their tentacles around looking for levers they can control and pull to their heart's content. If pretending to be a leader grants them power, they'll do that. If pretending to be a fragile little flower absolves them of accountability, they'll do that. If they concede a narrative that takes something away from you for even the slightest bemusement, they'll do that. The only thing that saved Raphael from being medically retired was his superior position, no lever there. Closing. Kevin Wilde and his ilk aren't just nuisances, they are destructive forces wrapped in self-congratulatory mediocrity. They are the termites gnawing away at the foundations of Western civilization, the corporate jesters too stupid to realize they're playing with lit dynamite. These people don't merely wreck lives, they do it with a smug grin, convinced their chaos is leadership development. Their antics cost children their parents, employees their sanity, and sometimes even lives, because not everyone can weather the endless grind of narcissistic manipulation. Kevin, you and your kind are accomplices to the silent epidemic of corporate-driven despair. You should feel ashamed, though we know you're too hollow for such a human response. The damage you inflict is exponential. CEOs hire you, thinking you'll help personnel development, only to be forced to plead you for more when their organizations dismantle into joyless deteriorating nightmares, unaware you are the cause. You don't improve anyone's lives, you vacuum purpose and fulfillment out of the workplace, leaving behind broken spirits and pink slips. And yet, you strut around, puffed up like overcooked soufflés, peddling self-help snake oil as though it's ambrosia. Kevin, let me be clear, the world does not need you. You're not special. You're not clever. You're not insightful. You're a grifter, an empty shell of buzzwords and delusion. You don't belong in leadership coaching, you belong on a stage, pretending to be a tree in someone else's talent show. Maybe acting is your true calling, at least there, the destruction you cause would be contained to your own fragile ego. CEOs, take note, every dollar you pay Kevin and his contemporaries is blood money siphoned from your employees' dignity and well-being. Every initiative they touch rots from the inside out. Fire these people. Send them packing to whatever dark corner of the universe will have them. These clowns are the bane of productivity, the enemies of human decency, and the living embodiment of everything wrong with corporate culture. Kevin, you may never understand the pain you've caused, the lives you've disrupted, or the despair you've fueled, but know this, some of us see you for what you are. You are not a leader. You are not a guide. You are a parasite. This work contains references to characters Captain James Tiberius Kirk and Commander Spock, which are copyrighted properties owned by CBS Studios Incorporated and/or Paramount Global. These characters are used in this work under the doctrine of fair use, for purposes including but not limited to commentary, criticism, or transformative storytelling. This work is not authorized, sponsored, or endorsed by CBS Studios Incorporated, Paramount Global, or any associated entities. Parting words. To any who bought Kevin's book of your own free will. You don't exist. The only thing you are expected to do is vote, and you really shouldn't do that. If you think you do exist, you need some serious help. To those who were assigned a copy of Kevin's book. The person who gave you Kevin's book is most likely a malignant narcissist who is angry that you didn't praise them enough for their feedback. If you replied to their feedback with a logical assessment of new information that would possibly change the validity of the suggestion, you are now on a list somewhere. I feel for you. Good luck. To those buying Kevin's book in bulk for your organization. Why are you doing that? Who put you up to that? Stop it. This is a very bad sign. Your organization is on a steep decline toward a low-trust pit of snakes. I hope it's not too late. To anyone who got Kevin's book for someone else. Wow. You should feel bad. You probably won't, but you should. Read up on Stoicism. I know you forgive yourself, but I hope one day the ones you manipulate will also forgive you. Try to be a better person. To Zenger Folkman. I really would be seriously embarrassed if I were peppered throughout Kevin's book, praising it as brilliant. It's clear by your endorsement that you also wouldn't know real leadership if it slapped you in the face and yelled, "Drop and give me 20. I expect some fitting retaliation when I take my first 360. To Kevin Wilde. I'm sure your book was just a productive Saturday afternoon for you, but it takes months to clean up the damage it causes. You were never really all that useful. You were a checkbox checked for corporate audits mandating roles like yours. Any influence you had in promoting the people that satisfied you was highly misplaced. You've put psychopaths behind the wheel of the bus. I await your apology. About the author of this review. The author of this review is a technologist with an engineer's brain, a philosopher's spine, and a relentless commitment to truth. He is notorious, or perhaps infamous, for encouraging coworkers to critique and ask questions, evaluating such carefully. Nonetheless, this has occasionally earned him an accusation of being argumentative or defensive when he's asked follow-up questions or got too close to exposing inconsistencies. So this is not his first rodeo. One year, for the annual review ritual, his manager suggested the author contact the company's version of Kevin to pursue a Zenger Folkman 360, a man just like Kevin. We could call him Kevin, but we'll call him Suzanne. Suzanne was still nursing an old grudge about the author. Instead of facing the author like a man, Suzanne scurried behind the author's back, to the manager and director, to decree, without evidence, that a 360 would be a waste of money because the author, without a doubt, wouldn't take any feedback seriously. The author was not given a chance to hear or respond to the justification for the claim. Many years before, the author wanted to give a presentation to a reporting committee about how metrics are used to ensure productive outcomes and met with different departments to honestly appreciate how they measure effectiveness. Suzanne came to answer the question for his programs. Turns out in that time, to the author's complete surprise, it really wasn't measured, but Suzanne had good vibes from the emails they got about the free snacks on training days. Suzanne was insulted by the question and angered that he didn't have an answer. Fast forward back to that 360. Suzanne finally seized his moment of petty revenge, and was more likely afraid that the results of the 360 might show that his opinion was the outlier. Suzanne, having no real experience with the author, convinced the author's management that he is not receptive, and gave the author the assignment to read Coachability, the Leadership Superpower. Surely, having to write a paper about what he's learned will teach this smart guy to stay in his lane. That would have been enough to prompt the author to write this review, but wait, there's more. The author has studied psychology for several decades and has observed the impact of these narcissists in his personal life. The author had the occasion to be involved in a legal battle. A third-party attorney repeatedly refused to do her job due to an obvious bias toward the other side's checkbook. When the author provided clear evidence of the misconduct and insisted the attorney do the right thing, the attorney gathered her flying monkeys and framed the author as suddenly, after 2 years, being the villain. Flying monkeys is a term used in the public discourse for the people in the narcissist circle cheering them on and defending them. They are mostly other, weaker, narcissists, feeding on what is left behind, though they tend to be each other's flying monkeys interchangeably. For example, the first 8 pages of Kevin Wilde's book looks like such a swarm. The attorney shelled the author in court with 6 witnesses, all financially supported by the attorney. They could not produce a logical argument for their position, so they resorted to ad hominem. They each accused the author of not being receptive to feedback, with no examples. The top psychology expert in the region was finally forced to provide a definition for receptive, and literally said, under oath, on the witness stand, that it meant agreeance. He actually confirmed that his expectation of the author was unquestioning agreement with his false accusations. For some engineers, anything worth engineering is worth over-engineering. And that's how we get to a 38-page book reply to an otherwise forgettable self-help book of the month. The author of this review decided that Kevin Wilde's book so neatly packaged the self-incrimination of Kevin's kind, and is so dangerous, there is a moral obligation to bring a reckoning and smack the book squarely in its smug entitled face. Coachability, the Leadership Superpower Roast of Kevin Wilde. This review is written as a public service announcement to inform the public of the societal hazards posed by the guidance of Kevin and his kind, in my opinion. In the same way a movie can be over-the-top aestheticized to lessen the blow of some heavy theme, this review is staged as a roast so that the excessive insults will allow humor to help shield those who could or should feel guilt, blame, or shame for the undeniable and immeasurable harm they have caused colleagues, employees, companies, families, children, and the rest of civilization. But seriously, get a copy of Kevin's book and see for yourself. The best way to get a free copy is to be the kind of person to have it assigned to you by some wimp in your company.